Hello, my name is Charles Cowap and I'm the author of the recently published report from the RICS on some new challenges for international professional practice, the move from market value to natural value. We launched our report at the RICS itself in Parliament Square in London on the 15th of November 2012. In these slides I'm going to take you through the presentation that we made that last night and pick up some of the key points from the discussion afterwards. It's quite clear that new land management requirements are emerging. There are going to be new markets for land management and there are going to be new challenges to professional practice. You can see a herd of reindeer here in the picture, perhaps the ideal farming enterprise, because the people you can see with the reindeer have also quite happily paid to feed them. And of course feed is one of a farmer's biggest costs. Here you can see some badly eroded peat on the edge of Kinder Scout in Derbyshire. Not only does this represent a waste of a vital resource, it also represents a huge lost opportunity, as the next few slides will make clear, I hope. Here is some peat, not quite in such bad condition, but going the same way. This is on Dartmoor, and these pictures were taken in mid-November 2012. The problem here is that the peat surface has been broken up, it's beginning to erode, it will start to wash away through all the little drainage gullies that crisscross Dartmoor and other moors like it. But here we see some work which has been undertaken to start to restore the peat. Small dams have been made. You can see the two people standing on an intersection of these dams. These help to hold the water back, and sphagnum mosses start to colonize the pool areas, and that in turn helps to recreate the peat. In this picture we can see the luxuriant top green vegetation growth, and as you look down the picture you can see how this becomes a matted tangle of decaying growth at the bottom of the picture, and that in turn will reduce to just 1 millimetre of thickness of peat per year. So there's 10 centimetres of top growth, about 1 centimetre of matted material, all combining to make 1 millimetre of peat in a year. In short, it takes a long time to make peat, and it's a very valuable resource for reasons we'll see. Let's have a look at an example from Exmoor, where we've been doing some research work recently. Here, diagrammatically as it were, is Exmoor itself, and here's the nearby river system. The River Barle drains down from Exeter to the River Exe. There's a little picture showing what the upper reaches of the Barle look like on a sunny day in November 2012. To the east of the River Exe is the River Hadio. This was impounded some years ago to construct the Wimbleball Reservoir. This is used as a balancing reservoir to supplement the natural flow of the River Exe when water levels run low. Here is the Exbridge pumping station. Water is extracted at this point to provide drinking water for the southwest of the country. When the reservoir runs low, it has to be replenished. It has a small natural catchment area, and so therefore it's necessary during times of higher flow in the River Exe to pump water back up to the reservoir. This is a distance of about 5 miles, and the water has to be lifted at a height of about 120 metres. That can involve 3 pumps running for most of the winter months. So the scheme here is that if the peat on Exmoor can be restored into good and healthy condition, there is every possibility that less pumping will be required, and that the peat itself will act as a kind of sponge to balance out the flows in the River Exe. It will hold the water back when there's heavy rainfall, and it will gradually release it during times of lower rainfall. In addition, peat is one of the best natural ways to absorb carbon from the atmosphere and store it, provided the peat is being put into and kept in good condition. So we have a combined scheme here of using the restoration of the peat to manage the flow of the water, capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and lock up the carbon out of harm's way, and in addition both of those operations have great benefits for the general biodiversity of the area. And it should be noted here that much of the world's remaining fragile peat resources are to be found in the United Kingdom and Ireland. I'm now going to have a look at some business opportunities that were identified earlier this year by the Valuing Nature Network. In joint equal first place was the prospect for biodiversity offsetting and conservation banking. It was estimated that the size of this market from housing alone in the United Kingdom could equally easily be £50 to £300 million a year. The real opportunities for professional practitioners would be around the brokerage of offsetting opportunities, certification that offsetting is being done to satisfactory standards, and of course the registration of offset sites. This also has implications for the work of property valuers and appraisers, because builders and developers who were consulted in the course of developing these business opportunities were quite clear in their opinion that any additional costs to them would merely be deducted from land value. For a professional audience of chartered surveyors, there's an immediate implication there for valuation practice, but also opportunities for work that will need to be undertaken. In joint first place is the development of a peatland carbon code. Work is already being advanced on this with funding from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and would basically consist of a code under which peat could be restored to store carbon through management schemes, with incentives made available to that from companies seeking to offset their carbon outputs. In the first place, while the science underlying this is developed, this is more likely to be for corporate social responsibility type incentives, but in due course it is quite possible that we shall see this being one way of matching our Kyoto Protocol requirements to measure the offset of greenhouse gases. And again, there will be opportunities here, not only in certifying sites for carbon storage, but actually in also arranging deals, a brokerage function really, in putting industrial producers of excess carbon in contact with those who manage land and can provide suitable opportunities to offset their carbon outputs. None of this, of course, should undermine the first and foremost obligation to try and reduce output in the first place, but when output has been reduced as much as possible, then the possibilities of offsetting do need to come into play. In second place on the list was the production of wood fuel for wood burning stoves, and that's quite clearly an opportunity for rural estate managers to pursue that area. It's also become clear during the course of this work that the United Kingdom is very rapidly developing a very extensive knowledge base in the management of ecosystem services, and there will surely be opportunities for this to be exported to other countries wishing to follow our examples here. Incidentally, in the picture on the right hand side, the lower one, you can see a peatland restoration area on Dartmoor, on Exmoor, one of the wetter sites there. There are also opportunities for what are called layered payment for ecosystem services schemes. This would involve, for example, in the Exmoor example I showed you a moment ago, taking the water opportunities, the peat opportunities, the biodiversity offsetting opportunities and the biodiversity management opportunities, and either bundling them together as one service to one buyer, or layering them. In other words, selling them separately to different buyers. So the Exmoor project is quite a good example of that. Carbon sequestration has already been touched on in some of the examples that I've said, but in particular we have an obligation to be able to produce zero carbon housing by 2016. Technically, this is going to be a huge challenge, as one or two members of the audience acknowledged at our launch event. And it does seem that once everything that has been done with design and construction and subsequent management, then there will be a remaining requirement to offset carbon impacts, perhaps through the likes of the Exmoor peat storage scheme. The certification of sustainability outcomes will surely provide an opportunity for intermediaries, and sustainable tourism is already well developed as a business area in many parts of the world. You can see in the pictures on this slide, first of all, the top right hand one is a weather monitoring station and a groundwater monitoring station set up on Exmoor, and you can just see the little black dip wells which are every 15 minutes monitoring fluctuations in the water levels in the ground and sending that data by remote signal back to Exeter University for analysis there. The lower picture is a flume which is measuring the flow of water from Exmoor. You can see the rather bold scenery which has been painted on this. The contractor who constructed this for South West Water in Exmoor actually was based in Barnsley in Yorkshire, so he's chosen to paint onto his construction a scene of the moors above Barnsley, quite different in character from Exmoor. So for anybody who's listening to this who's from Yorkshire, there's a little bit of Yorkshire right out in the middle of Exmoor. In ninth equal position is the development of the UK as a global centre of excellence in the certification of ecosystem services, and along with that the technical mastery that we have been developing of water reuse technologies. The 11th opportunity on this list was the scope to reduce insurance risk through green infrastructure development, a vital area with much of the country facing flooding risks and the strong possibility, it seems, that insurance companies will withdraw property insurance cover in areas prone to flooding sometime next year. This, coupled with the possibility of using funds from the new Community Infrastructure Levy, introduces an alternative source of funding for new development, new land management schemes to reduce flooding risks to vulnerable properties. Finally, the idea of environmental bonds has been mooted, under which the government would underwrite investment opportunities. This would allow new funds to be set up, capable of borrowing money on preferential terms with the security of government backing behind them, and making this available for a number of environmental schemes of the sort which have been outlined in the previous points. And there on the slide you can see the reference for further information about these opportunities. Along with these new business and land management opportunities, new valuation requirements will be emerging as well. There has been a considerable body of work undertaken in recent years over the valuation of more and more intangible assets, and on the screen you can see some work that was put out by the Accounting Standards Board looking at the valuation of heritage assets. Valuers from Kingston University worked on a project with the RICS and with the Treasury to look at the concepts of valuing heritage assets and how a case for their valuation could be made and sustained, and this found its way into Financial Reporting Standard number 30 from the Accounting Standards Board, which gives some guidance to accountants and valuers on how to deal with heritage assets in company balance sheets. So some work has been done already, and we can look at a number of other examples. For instance, RICS has put out an information paper on the valuation of water as a separate resource. Work continues in this area. I was myself the author of the RICS guidance note on the valuation of trees for amenity and related non-timber uses, which was published a couple of years ago. In addition to these, we've seen information papers and guidance notes on green infrastructure in urban areas. That was written by one of our panel members who will be meeting later on, and on contamination, the environment and sustainability. Residential property valuation and sustainability issues have also been looked at in an information paper from the RICS in 2011. But valuation certainly faces a number of challenges. First of all, the whole area of economic appraisal. Admittedly, work has been done. Here's a paper from the RICS Rural Research Conference in 1997 looking at the use of public surveys to estimate the value of natural resources. Some years later, contingent valuation was considered through a case study at a later Roots Research event. And now we have the emergence of ecosystem services, which is very much the theme that we have been reviewing throughout this presentation. Work has been going on in this area for several years now, and we can go back to some work undertaken in DEFRA on the quantification and valuation of ecosystem services back in September 2006. We can also see some work coming from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development a little later in February 2007. But more recently we have seen the TEEB report, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, with the subtitle you can see on the screen there, Mainstreaming the Economics of Nature. And we've had the first national ecosystem assessment anywhere in the world undertaken here in the United Kingdom, and there you can see the technical report summary of that on the right hand side of the screen. Ecosystem services, then, have generally been categorised under four areas, which you can see at the bottom right hand of the screen. Goods. We're quite used to putting a figure on those because that's the production of food, fibre and fuels. It's also the production of fresh water. But ecosystem services become a little harder when we come to regulating services like the pollination service provided by bees, climate regulation, natural disease regulation and pest regulation, and even harder still when we come to the cultural and the supporting services. The supporting services include areas like the cycling of nutrients in the soil, the production of atmospheric oxygen from plants, the way that water cycles from rainfall back down to the oceans and back up into the clouds again, and most challenging of all in terms of placing a value on them, the cultural services that so many of us derive from nature. Just that ability to sit quietly in the countryside or walk quietly, taking in the surrounding scenery and the refreshment of mind and body that brings. However, the Economics of Environmental and Biodiversity report did attempt to summarise a number of approaches for the estimation of nature's values, and here it what came up with. Broadly, it looked at preference-based approaches, and then it looked at biophysical approaches, and it classified these into broad areas of neoclassical economics and market theory, approaches based in political science, resilience theory, and industrial ecology and thermodynamics. And if we pull these various approaches together, we can actually classify them as those which property valuers and managers are likely to feel most comfortable with, and those that they're not, on a type of traffic light system. So, if we look at replacement cost methods, insurance value, market analysis, they're all close to familiar territory for property valuers and managers. However, once we get into ecological footprints, avoided cost methods, risk analysis, contingent valuation, input-output analysis, production functions, we're starting to get a little hazy based on our traditional training and professional experience. And by the time we get to the red lights of regime shift analyses, deliberate valuations, resilience values, joint analysis, mitigation cost methods and so on, we really are starting to grope in the dark. There are key challenges here, and there is much to learn about a much wider range of valuation methods. So, turning to our role as valuers, just where does it fit? If we have a look at the government's Foresight Land Use Futures report published in 2010, that was very clear in pointing to the need for a better appreciation of value in land use governance, saying that how we value land, the services it provides, is at the heart of decisions on land use change. It went on to say that we need more sophisticated approach to valuing land, and that this needs to be embedded in policy cycles and into government mechanisms, including future incentives and regulation. Finally, we can extract this point from the Futures report, that the appropriate concept of value is a broad one, encompassing the full range of ecosystem services, whether or not they are marketed. These clearly represent key challenges to our work as professional valuers, and that brings us to some key questions for the RICS. Is this anything to do with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors? How does this relate to our public interest function? What should the institution be doing to support the work of members? How does it relate to the global positioning of the RICS, and thus what, if anything, needs to be done? Your eye may have been caught by the picture to the right there. That's from a satellite photograph, and it seems to be the case that a particular farmer and landowner was making his views very clear to the Rural Payments Agency on their monitoring activities with the single payment scheme. That's what it looks like anyway, and thanks to Twitter for that illustration. It was with this background of what the RICS should do that I was asked to prepare the Thinkpiece, and really the start point for this was to look back at the Royal Charter of the RICS, and what that charter obliges us as an organisation to do is to promote the usefulness of the profession to public advantage. And what we have done is to identify some new opportunities in land management, which I hope I have shared with both the audience at the evening presentation and with you in this video, and I think it's also pointing the way very much to some new ways of working in development. There are undoubtedly going to be some new points to reflect in conventional valuations, and indeed there will be some new types of valuation as well. Therefore, I feel it's incumbent upon us as a professional institution to offer our expertise, because land tenure is broadly a neglected area as yet in the development of ecosystem services, and yet that's an area that we can claim, I think, leading expertise in. And I think we also need to offer the benefit of our experience of undertaking valuation work in challenging commercial markets with the rigour of the marketplace behind all the work we do. And I think we also have a highly developed expertise in brokerage, which is there to be shared with these new emerging markets as well. All important points, I think, and all an important claim on the resources of the RICS in ensuring it is fully recognised and involved in these important new areas. It was now time for questions and discussion, and I'm delighted to say that I was joined by a very distinguished panel. Michael Pettini, who's the Director for Sustainable Land Use, Rural Evidence and Analysis from DEFRA, Professor Alistair Scott, a leading planning academic from Birmingham City University, Paul Collins, himself a Chartered Surveyor and responsible for various projects looking at sustainable green infrastructures from Nottingham Trent University, and Duncan Cairns, another Chartered Surveyor who's one of the Directors of the Environment Bank Limited, which is seeking to put developers in contact with suitable offsetting and mitigation opportunities in the environmental sector. What sort of questions did we get briefly? First of all, the language of ecosystem services. Is it a problem? Broadly, yes. But hang in there. A group of farmers down in Exmoor who had already come across this area at a recent meeting didn't see it as a problem. Actually, they had started to adapt. Surely the key challenge here for any profession is to act as the intermediary between the expert language of the specialists and the need for clients to understand clearly. So we shouldn't turn our back perhaps on the language of ecosystem services, but we should stand ready to moderate it. Problems of long-term control necessary to develop ecosystem services as against the need for opportunism in land management were highlighted by one member of the audience. We also heard about the need for compelling evidence in order to take these schemes forward. The Woodland Carbon Code was cited as a very good example of this, and we'll come back to that in a minute. A very pragmatic question from the senior partner of a firm on a Monday morning: can he contemplate what we had been talking about this evening, really providing the means to pay the firm's salary bill? Conversely, however, perhaps if we don't grasp these opportunities, we might be looking at there being no work to do to pay the salary bill at all in 10 to 15 years' time, because it will all be undertaken by other people by then. Ecosystem services? Enhancement? Or actually, is it a form of biodiversity dumping, an easy way for developers and carbon producers and so on to slide slipperily away from their prime objections to reduce and reuse resources to better advantage? Clearly, any objectives like this need to be put very much in the context of that mitigation hierarchy. Should we have one-stop shop to realise value? This was illustrated by reference to work undertaken in Belize, which had helped to underline the importance of various coastal developments to the protection of savanna wetlands. Does the Department for Community and Local Government really understand? A plea here for joined-up government. One speaker pointed to the rapidity of recent progress. Only a few years ago, DEFRA was just starting to explore these issues, but now we have a forestry carbon code. We've got a vast range of research projects underway and development projects really trying to bring some of these ideas very quickly to the market. The Exmoor example that I started with was a prime example of that. One question from an accountant in the audience: is land merely seen by big businesses as a commodity? And some diversion of views there, I think, between the rural practitioners in the audience. I think it's fair to say I've always had some sort of sense of stewardship over land, over some of the more commercial elements in the audience. And finally, what are we learning from abroad? One member of the audience was able to point out that she had studied in New Zealand about 25 years ago and had been learning about the valuation of environmental services even then. And certainly in entitling our paper, The Challenges to International Professional Practice, we were very keen to learn both from positive and negative New Zealand, Australian and other overseas experience, some of which is actually reviewed in the Thinkpiece itself. That was our evening. That's how to get in touch with me, and I hope you found that an informative and a stimulating introduction to this vital subject area, and I hope on the basis of that you'll be able to find the Thinkpiece itself on the RICS website and have a good look at it for yourself. Thank you for listening, and farewell.